My guest today is paleontologist and curator Dr. Matthew Lamanna of the Carnegie Museum of Natural History in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm Jay Mays, and this is SEARED. Amazing food, remarkable people.
So I think we should talk about Paralititan, and I think we should talk about Antarctica.
Okay.
Because they're both fascinating stories, and we could pick and choose, but I think we should do both.
Okay.
So let's start with Paralititan, because that was early in your career.
Sure, yeah. So I would say probably the reason we're having this conversation, so in other words, the reason I'm here in Pittsburgh,
right,
is that when I was in grad school, me and some other grad students and colleagues of ours, and my graduate advisor, made a discovery that I would say was maybe one of the luckier ones in the history of paleontology. So the story begins, and I'll keep it short-ish, but the story begins with...
you can go as long as you want, though,
okay,
honestly.
Yeah. In the early part of the 20th century, a German paleontologist named Ernst Stromer went to a place called the Bahariya Oasis in Egypt, and he went there looking for fossils. And in 1911, he found what would, I think he even knew at the time, were the first dinosaur fossils that have been found from Egypt.
Wow.
And he collected some of those, and then he also hired a collector named Richard MacRae to continue collecting for him. To cut the story short, MacRae and Stromer collectively collected, thank you.
Oh, thank you very much.
That looks really good.
Yeah.
Collectively collected a very significant number of dinosaur fossils from Egypt.
Thank you.
And brought them all back to Munich, where Stromer studied them. So over the course of from about 1915 to 1936, Stromer published a series of papers where he described this dinosaur fauna from the Bahariya Oasis of Egypt, and the most famous of those dinosaurs and the most remarkable of those dinosaurs is a thing called Spinosaurus, and you've probably heard of this. It's if you've had the misfortune to see the third Jurassic Park movie, it's the one that kind of acts as the villain in that movie. It swallows a cell phone and all this stuff. So so the Stromer described Spinosaurus. He described a few other dinosaurs from this site, and kept them in a museum in Munich. But unfortunately, of course, post 1936, World War II breaks out, and on April 24th, 1944, when the British bombed Munich, they accidentally, of course, they weren't going there to destroy Spinosaurus, but they hit the museum that housed the Spinosaurus fossil, and that museum caught fire, and it actually burned, and all of the dinosaurs that had been found from Egypt to that point were completely destroyed. And so when I was a kid, like growing up in upstate New York with my dinosaur books, I would open up, some of the more detailed of these books would contain accounts of this story about how, Stromer had found and described this amazing dinosaur Spinosaurus, but then it had been blown up in World War II, and that it didn't physically exist anymore. It existed only as Stromer's description of the fossil, and also the illustrations that he had published of it. So in essence, this fossil existed only as pictures in books, which is amazing. And so when I first got to grad school in 1997, I was always interested in dinosaurs from the southern hemisphere continents, and that's because in general we don't know as much about them as we do about their northern hemisphere counterparts. And Africa especially the end of the age of dinosaurs in Africa is really, really poorly known. So even though Stromer's dinosaurs had been blown up they were still some of the most completely understood dinosaurs from the end of the Age of Dinosaurs in Africa.
Yeah.
And so when I was a grad student, I made this sort of dream list, this like list of like, if I could go anywhere in the world, where would I go? And one of the places that rose to the top was Bahariya Oasis of Egypt, because not only did we have the chance to find new things, we had a chance to, uncover these dinosaurs that Stromer had found, to basically replace them, to restore Stromer's legacy, the legacy of these lost dinosaurs of Egypt. And yeah, so through a series of very bizarre coincidences and luck, frankly, a lot of luck, me and a bunch of other grad students and my graduate advisor and a few other colleagues of ours and volunteers found ourselves in the Bahariya Oasis in January of 2000. And a few days, actually towards the end of January, we worked there for, we had a film crew following us around. We were a bunch of grad students. There was a ton of pressure on us, and worst of all, we weren't really finding much of anything.
Okay.
And so, it was actually quite a tense situation for the first, maybe 2-3 weeks of this dig.
That cranks up the drama. If you're supposed to be finding something, you're not finding something.
Totally. The film crew, not only were they filming us, they had funded our expedition.
Oh, wow.
So, the pressure was really on, because they'd put their faith in us and we didn't want to disappoint them.
Absolutely.
And I was younger, and I'm still fairly excitable, but I was younger and maybe ornerier in those days. So we were at each other's throats a few times. It wasn't a pleasant experience for the beginning of the trip.
Yeah.
But on my brother's birthday in 2000, January 27th, 2000, I walked around a hill and I found this really interesting site, and it contained lots and lots and lots of fossils of dinosaurs and fishes and crocs and all sorts of other things that would have been living in the oasis 95 million years ago. And so that was really exciting. But the day before, the reason I was in that area in the first place is because the year before, my friend and fellow grad student Josh Smith had done a little recon expedition to the Bahariya Oasis in 1999, and he found a few dinosaur fragments at this place near a hill called Jebel El Faga. And for whatever reason, we ignored that for the first 3 weeks we were there. We just figured it wasn't a big deal, nothing was going to come from that site. It was just a few weathered bits of bone on the surface, on the floor of the desert.
So you kind of associated it with just the bits.
Yeah, exactly. We thought that was the only thing that was left, was just the fragments that we were seeing on the ground. And but we had the bright idea to go back there after 3 weeks of swinging and missing in other parts of the oasis. And so the morning after I'd found, or nearby, I don't remember the exact day, but it was within a day or two of me finding this site on my brother's birthday, John's birthday site. We had convened at this dinosaur site that Josh had found in '99 to kind of hash out a plan for the day. And when I left them, Josh and another friend of ours named Jason Poole, who's a fossil preparator at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia, they were working on what we thought were two separate bones that were side by side. These and they looked like sort of long, thin bones, maybe rib bones of a dinosaur that would be good size, but not anything to write home about, I guess. And so that was how I left things when I went to work on my site, about a mile away or half mile away, something like that. And around the middle of the day, my walkie-talkie crackles, and it's Josh or Jason, I don't remember which, but whoever it is says something to the effect of, "You need to get over here right now," and there's probably an expletive thrown in there, for good measure. And so I get in and I don't know what's happening, but I get in the Land Cruiser that I had, and I drive over, and it takes a couple of minutes. And I get out, and what's happened is that Josh and Jason had continued to work on these quote-unquote small bones, and realized that they had cleaned the rock off that was intervening between the two small bones, and realized that they had been working on opposite sides of a single gigantic bone. And what this was the upper end of the upper arm bone, so the humerus bone, the bone between the shoulder and the elbow, of a dinosaur that we knew right then and there was one of the biggest that had ever been discovered.
Immediately.
Immediately we knew. I didn't know where it ranked, but I knew it was in the top 5 for sure. the year before, the summer before, Jason and I had been out in Montana digging up another long-necked, long-tailed dinosaur, a sauropod dinosaur. So every long-necked, long-tailed dinosaur you've ever seen in your life belongs to the sauropod group.
Okay.
And we'd been digging up a different sauropod in Montana, and it also had the upper arm bone preserved. And the whole thing was only about 3 feet long.
Right. How big was this one?
The one that we had uncovered?
Yeah.
The part I could see was probably about maybe 2.5 feet long, and it was clear it was just the upper part of it.
Wow.
So the total length of this giant humerus bone, this giant bone between the shoulder and the elbow, is 5 feet 7, 1.69 meters. Wow. And to this day, it remains one of the longest upper arm bones of any dinosaur that's ever been discovered. And thankfully, we found not lots of other bones, but we found, I would say, roughly 20 to 25 other bones of this skeleton, all buried in the same quarry as the expedition progressed. We ended up kind of collecting about 6 tons of material, so rock and fossil, from this single quarry, and all of which belonged to this one dinosaur, with the exception of one tooth of a carnivorous dinosaur that we think might have been scavenging this body.
Just fell out in the same spot.
Yeah, exactly. And dinosaurs recycle their teeth throughout their lives. They replace their teeth throughout their lives, like a shark. Exactly, like a shark or Komodo dragon or something like that.
Yeah.
And so probably what happened is this meat-eating dinosaur bit into probably the dead carcass of this big plant-eating dinosaur and lost a tooth in the process. And this was no big deal for it because it could just grow a new one. But we collected all those bones. We shipped them back to Philadelphia, where I was in grad school at the time. We cleaned the rock off the bones over the course of maybe a year-ish or so. On the eve of our second expedition to Egypt in 2001, we sent a manuscript into the journal Science, describing this discovery and hoping against hope that they'd decide to publish it.
Yeah.
Because Science is one of the 2 best journals in the world. And again, we were grad students. I was 24 or 25 when this was happening. So this was just at the very beginning of my career. And so we crossed our fingers and sent it in. We did the best we could and hoped for the best. And we went and came back from that second expedition in 2001. And I remember the day in, I think it was in May of 2001, when Josh got the notification that our paper had been accepted for publication.
That's a great feeling.
Yeah, I was eating lunch outside, and in this little courtyard that was near our office building, the geology building at the University of Pennsylvania. And I remember Josh opening up the window and yelling out to me something to the effect of, "We made it," or "We're in," or whatever. And those kinds of things stay with you,
Yeah, that's huge.
And so we. That dinosaur that Josh originally found in 1999 that we kind of realized was something important in 2000 and collected then, made it into the journal Science. That was a pretty big deal.
Of course.
I mean, certainly for me personally, and I think it was important for our science as well in some sense. And that discovery was the discovery that kind of made me go from somebody who was totally nobody to somebody who was a little less nobody. And I think that caught the attention of some people at the Carnegie Museum. And so when they opened up their job for their dinosaur curator 3 years later, by coincidence, I happened to be finishing my PhD around that time. And I think people, the Paralititan discovery was one of the things that I think got me an interview, and I must have done good enough to, to pass the test. And here we are 15 years later. So I've been at the Carnegie ever since.
Wow. So Peril of Titan was the gateway to Carnegie.
Yeah, exactly. Ultimately. Yeah, I think I forgot to mention, but this dinosaur turned out to be a new species. So when they turn out to be new species, you get to give them names, and that's super fun. Yeah.
And so you name it's Peril of Titan.
Yeah. Well, we pronounce it Paralititan.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Paralititan.
Yeah, but
we could have an entire episode on how people pronounce dinosaur names.
You totally could. People, a lot of times, even we paleontologists don't really know how these are pronounced, and I have colleagues, say in Italy, that speak these languages from which these names come,
right? And
they would pronounce it Paralititan. So we think Paralititan sounds a little cooler.
Paralititan, I agree. Well, cheers to that. Cheers to that discovery and Paralititan.
Yeah, it was like I said, just probably the biggest discovery that I've ever had the fortune to be a part of.
That's amazing. Well, I think for me, that's a good place to start. Is why don't we start with the literal biggest and the figurative biggest discovery that you've ever had?
Yeah, sure. And for better or worse, I've actually been involved with the discoveries of, or at least the scientific namings, in one case the discovery, in the other case the scientific naming of two dinosaurs that were, as big or bigger than Paralititan. So, like one of my, I guess, notorious claims to fame is that I'm part of, I've co-named, I think about, it would be 3 of the roughly we'll conservatively say 10 biggest dinosaurs that we know about currently, and probably more like 3 of the top 8 or 7, something like that. So,
can you give us those names too?
Yeah, sure. So the second of those we discovered it in 2005, believe it or not, in Patagonia, and I was there when we found it.
That was a Fieldwork too. You were there for the dig? And
yes, I was. Gotcha. Yeah. The initial stages, so whereas we had maybe 20 to 25 bones of Paralititan, we were able to collect everything we had in a single field season. With this other dinosaur, we had, it was about the same size as Paralititan, but in this time we had, I think it's, God, I can't remember the exact number, but it's something like, it's well over 100 bones of this thing, which means that we have, basically we have part of the neck and more or less the whole rest of the body minus the hands.
Gotcha.
And then we even have a little tiny pieces of skull as well. So this was, this dinosaur's importance was, it was important because it was big, but it was mostly important because it was the first time we had one of these giant titanosaurs. The group to which Paralititan belongs, the sauropod subgroup to which it belongs, is called Titanosauria. And these are the sauropod group. So again, they would have been long-necked, long-tailed, small head, 4 big elephant-like legs, like all other sauropods. But they're a specific kind of flavor of sauropod, if you will.
Sure.
And lots of titanosaurs were known. A few of them were known from pretty good skeletons, but none of the biggest ones were known from much of anything. A few vertebrae here, like a leg bone there. Some of the original specimens of some of these giant titanosaurs make Paralititan look really good in that regard. So, for instance, probably the most famous of the giant titanosaurs is an animal called Argentinosaurus, predictably from Argentina.
Of course.
The described number of described bones for that is 13. And so that may or may not be clear to people, the importance of that, but when we paleontologists are trying to reconstruct the appearance, the anatomy, the biology, the evolutionary relationships, whatever it might be, of any extinct animal, the more we've got of that animal, the better off we are, the more we can tell about it. And so the bones of Argentinosaurus are enough to know it's a titanosaur and it's big. And really not that much more than that. And so the discovery of this thing in 2005, when we knew we had much of the skeleton of a giant titanosaur, probably not quite as big as Argentinosaurus, but big nonetheless, was really important in that it gave us the first window that we had, the first good window that we had into the anatomy, biology, etc. of one of the biggest members of these groups.
That's fascinating.
And so this thing, it turned out to be another new species, and we named it, this is maybe my favorite name that I've ever been a part of. We named it Dreadnoughtus Schranni. So Schrann is after Adam Schrann, who was one of the benefactors of the discovery, but Dreadnoughtus means probably what you think it means. It means, it's kind of a double entendre, I guess, for the battleships of the 20th century, 2 of which were in the Argentine Navy. So that was kind of a cool reference there. And we found 2 skeletons, exactly, the dreadnought battleships. But also Dreadnoughtus in Old English means fearer of nothing. When you're probably 95 feet long, maybe something like 45 to 50 tons in weight, and your brain is like the size of an apple, it's probably really hard to feel anything, let alone fear. And so this thing, we think, was the biggest thing on its landscape and probably didn't really have much to fear. So we felt like the name Dreadnoughtus was appropriate. We published that one.
It sounds pretty badass, too.
I like it, too. I think a lot of people have really gravitated towards it. It's in fact, it makes a little tiny cameo in the latest Jurassic World movie. The Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. So if you have to be very sharp-eyed, but at the very end, there's a part where somebody, I think it's Jeff Goldblum, so Ian Malcolm, opens up this briefcase, and there's a bunch of vials of dinosaur DNA inside. And if you look really closely, one of them is Dreadnoughtus.
You see Dreadnoughtus.
Yep. So we're hopeful that it'll make an appearance. The actual dinosaur will make an appearance in the 3rd movie, although we don't know.
I I have to tell you this now, since you brought up Fallen Kingdom. I was so excited about today that I literally watched it last night.
Funny.
I had to fall asleep to something, and that's what I chose. So.
Okay, so yeah, I think I have permission to speak freely here. So
you do, of course.
Yeah, so Jurassic Park, the original Jurassic Park, was awesome for me. I was in high school when it came out.
Yeah.
I remember the first moment when there's a big Brachiosaurus that walks on screen, and the lead character, Alan Grant.
Yeah.
Sees this thing and takes his hat off and jumps out of the Jeep and, gets completely freaked out and blown away by this thing. And I remember feeling the same thing because as a kid, I was one of those kids that always loved dinosaurs. And like to see this on the big screen, to see what had been playing in my head all those years as a child, was just a totally extraordinary thing. My family makes fun of me for this relentlessly, but the first time I saw the first Jurassic Park, you probably remember the end scene where they're about to get eaten by velociraptors, and when the T-Rex busts in and kicks some ass and saves the day and whatever. The idea of two velociraptors fighting a T-Rex was so amazing to 16 or 17-year-old me that I literally didn't remember the last 5 minutes of the movie the first time I saw it. I completely blacked out. I just was like, the awesomeness overload was like way too much for me. And,
that's amazing.
And so the my family makes fun of me for that, but they also make fun of me for this was one of the few movies I've seen multiple times in the theater, as you can imagine.
Same here.
Yeah, and so the second time I went to it with my brother. Yeah. And my brother and I are best friends. Like, we love each other to pieces. Like, we're absolutely each other's best buddy on the entire face of the planet. Yeah. But one of his favorite pastimes is making fun of me, and in particular for nerdiness. So I think I was, 1993. I would have been 17. So my brother and I and a couple of our friends go to see Jurassic Park again in the little local movie theater in upstate New York. And somebody is like waiting in line and like kind of asks us, like, has anybody seen this yet? Is it worth seeing or whatever? Yeah. And I say something to the effect of, oh, you should totally see it. The special effects will blow you away. Yeah. And my brother remembers that to this day and likes to imitate that as, me in this like uber nerd voice saying that you can't, you won't, you have to see this thing. The special effects will totally blow you away.
And that's what brothers are for. I think.
Exactly. So, and I have plenty of things to make fun of him for too. So.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm glad we mentioned Jurassic Park. Because it's what got me into dinosaurs for sure. My story's similar in terms of excitement and seeing it in the theater multiple times. So it's fun for me that we share that experience.
Yeah, totally. And I think for people of a certain age, like you and I are within, I think, a few years in age.
Yeah, 4 years. Yeah.
It is quite formative for the dinosaur geeks among us. And
when you were talking about the Brachiosaurus on screen. Like, that gave me chills. Like, literally, like I just
like something like the same moment.
Yeah,
probably.
Exactly, 100%.
Yeah. So, I had been fascinated by dinosaurs since I was a little tiny kid. Yeah. So, that was like, in that case, probably like 13 or 14 years of pent-up nerddom that came exploding out right there when I finally saw, what one of these things might have looked like when it was alive. Wow. So, and I'm not ashamed of that.
You shouldn't be.
Now, the subsequent movies I don't have as high praise for, but...
it's okay because they're dinosaur movies, but they're not as good of movies.
I feel like there were, again, without throwing anybody under the bus, I feel like there were opportunities that could have been taken advantage of that weren't.
Missed. They do turn into a little bit of monster movies.
Yeah.
Matt is one of my favorite people. No, not because he's a dinosaur nerd like me, although that does give him some points in my book, but because he's a kind person, a true adventurer. He's already briefly mentioned his travels to Patagonia and Egypt, and, well, there's more of that coming up.
I guess I probably can't drink my beer for continuity, right?
Oh, no, you can.
You can? Okay.
Yeah, we don't worry about that.
We used to, like, when we were doing, like, for instance, that documentary on Egypt that I mentioned, they were, naturally, they were really big into continuity. So if we were filming at the same site, like 3 days in a row, I'd have to wear the same clothes usually.
Oh my gosh!
Because
don't move your hammer and that sort of thing.
Sometimes, yeah. It's so this type of thing that we're doing today is really refreshing for me because a lot of my kind of film and video experience has been the classic, like, either talking head in a studio where it's like, you know, answer these questions, but answer them in the way we want. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or
with like a black background.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's usually a green screen, so they can like put a
yeah.
lab behind me, or like a dinosaur coming to eat my head, or whatever it might be. You know, or it's these sort of reality TV style, you know, field dramas where you know, they're supposed to be organic, but they're not.
They're just scripted
weirdly.
Yeah,
to a degree. Yeah, I mean, the script evolves as the season evolves, but the, you know, like, just as an example, I love the people. I will always love the people that made our Egypt show to pieces for the rest of my life, and I'm still good friends with 2 of the 3 of them. But they would sometimes, when we'd have an organic moment that they weren't filming for,
they'd have you
we'd have me reenact it. Yeah, so
which never comes off as
no, oh my god, especially for somebody that completely sucks at acting like me. Like we would. So just as an example, like we found this thing that we thought was pretty good, you know, the bones in the sand that we thought would lead to a fairly significant dinosaur skeleton. It turned out it didn't, but that's beside the point.
Happens.
Yeah, so I got to the site and we'd been grasping at straws for the first week or so. So we find this thing, our geologists, Ken and Jen, actually found it by driving by it, or maybe even arguably over it, that season. And so the rest of the paleontologists show up, and I got there and I saw it, and I said something to the effect of, this looks like the real thing. You know, this looks like something we've been really waiting for.
Yeah.
And the director, Jim, was there. I think it was Jim. It might have been Melissa, one of the other directors. But they're like, Matt, that was so good. Can you do it again? And I'm like, yeah, I guess so. Yeah. So, you know, so I strap on my lav and I try to do it. And then, you know, the first time it's like, I think this is like the real thing. And they're like, oh, that wasn't natural enough. Do it again. And so, like,
of course it's not natural enough.
I ended up doing it like 10 times. And by the end, I was like totally hamming it up. Like, you know, hey guys, I think this is the real thing.
That's how we should do our intro. We'll redo our intro. Like
exactly. Like snapping, pointing at the camera.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Finger guns.
Yep, exactly. So, and then another great moment from that production. So, filming a dinosaur documentary in the field, you spend about as much time doing filming as you do the actual work. So it comes with it produces a wonderful product. We're really glad to get our message out there. We're glad for the exposure. We're glad people believe in us, support us, things like that. But it doesn't come for free. There's a lot of work that's involved, and we would have to do all kinds of these reenactments, and a lot of times Josh and I would just ham it up completely.
Of course, you should.
Yeah, like so one time we were meant to be encountering a site for the first time, but of course it wasn't. And it was another one of these places that Josh had found the year before, like that he had scouted.
Yeah, exactly. Had detailed knowledge of.
Yeah, exactly. And we had, but even worse than that, we had already been there in the 2000 season, and the film crew decided they wanted to include it as part of the story.
Yeah.
So we get there, and you know, they're like, okay, you know, get out of the Land Cruiser, walk towards the site, you know, get your picks and shovels and stuff, and so we do all that, and we, you know, it looks reasonably natural, I think, but we get down and you know, on our hands and knees to look at this discovery again because we'd already seen it, and we're talking and making small talk, like fake banter, you know, like, oh, I wonder if this is a vertebra, you know, whatever it might be. And then finally Josh looks at me after about maybe 30 seconds of this. He looks at me and he goes, it's funny. I didn't expect it to be this brushed off. And like, it's so great because in the moment, I've seen like the blooper reel basically of this documentary. And in the moment you can see I'm trying like hell to keep a straight face. Like I'm doing the absolute best I can. Yeah. But if you've ever seen like Saturday Night Live skits where like somebody loses their shit, like Jimmy Fallon or whatever is notorious for this. Yeah, exactly. For like more cowbell, like he's just completely losing his crap the whole time.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. So I'm like sitting there trying to be serious, you know, whatever. And then you can see this smile and I'm fighting it and fighting it and fighting it. And finally I just like roll over on the ground on my back, like laughing hysterically.
As you should.
Exactly.
If that's requested of you, I feel like it's okay to laugh at that. And like recreating reality is not your job.
Yeah, exactly. And nor am I good at it. So
that's awesome. I feel like the field work, everything you've described from field work, which I've never had the joy of doing, has been a camaraderie experience.
Oh my God, totally, yeah. And you're good at picking up on the nuances of this, I think. And so I often describe fieldwork as like, you know, you're out in the middle of nowhere with a bunch of people that maybe a couple of whom you'll have known well beforehand. Most of whom you don't know super well usually.
Yeah.
If you end up doing a project for a while, you get to know everybody. But usually there's that first field season where not everybody knows each other and all that stuff. And the field is hard. It's weather conditions are often adverse. You can have permitting problems. Somebody can get bitten by a snake or stung by a scorpion.
Yeah.
A truck can break down. Whatever it might be.
Yeah.
I've actually repaired a gas tank with chewing gum. Believe it or not, in Patagonia.
You heard MacGyver and Indiana Jones. And
yeah. No, this is not made up. This stuff. This
and
is
Alan Grant. Yeah.
These field seasons can be really, really hard. And so as a result, the crew either ends up, usually the whole crew doesn't end up hating each other.
Yeah.
But, oftentimes there can be a couple people that
Sure.
aren't asked to join the field season again.
Sure. Rivalries form.
Right,
or
exactly.
something rubs someone the wrong way and it just
Right, and things get magnified in the field.
Yeah.
Like
it's intimate.
It is. And things that you brush off in normal life become kind of a big deal sometimes. And,
Is that a paleontology pun?
Not intentional,
Okay,
but I do
good
do
though.
that a lot. Yeah. For the most part, I would say the vast majority of seasons that I've been on, you become like family. I mean, you become like, our Antarctic team, I can go without seeing those guys for a while, and we get back together and it's like nothing ever happened.
Wow.
The last time, I have a really good friend in Australia, a guy, a paleontologist named Steve Salisbury, who's a lecturer at the University of Queensland there. Steve and I did fieldwork together from 2007 to 2009 in Australia. I was kind of a guest on his project because he was affiliated with the Carnegie Museum here, so he kind of invited me to join the party, and I was all too happy to take that offer.
Yeah.
So Steve and I had done fieldwork in Australia from 2007 to 2009. We did a field season in Antarctica in 2009, 2016.
Yeah.
But I hadn't seen him. I went back to Australia earlier this month, and I hadn't seen him for 3 years, and it was absolutely like we had never left. Like I could have seen him yesterday.
Right. That's a great feeling.
Yeah, and we're brothers. I mean, we're brothers from a different mother or something like that. And the same thing is true for a lot of the people I work with. Of course, it's a continuum of closeness, but many of us are family.
You hear that same thing from people who hike together or adventure together, and I wonder if it comes a little bit down to having to rely on people.
Yep, I think so.
Do you feel like
I
that's
totally
part of it?
agree.
Yeah.
Yep, and I think that I also think that for better or worse, going through difficult situations can, if it doesn't drive you apart, it's going to bring you together.
Yeah, that's a fantastic way of stating that. Yeah. Well, let's see if our food's ready, and we'll eat some beef tartare.
Sounds good, man.
All right.
The fieldcraft savvy of MacGyver, the do what you gotta do attitude of Indiana Jones, and the brain of Jurassic Park's Alan Grant. Matt is the only person I've met so far to have stepped foot on the world's 7th and most remote continent, Antarctica. See what I mean? Adventurer.
What country geographically has the most dig sites? Kind of per their size, right? Like broken down by size. Like density.
Okay, so
dig site density.
Density, good question. Density's really tough, actually. But in terms of like numbers of sites and numbers of dinosaurs, I don't know who ranks first per se.
Yeah.
But I can tell you generally kind of the top 4 or 5.
Yes.
And that would be
that.
China would be one.
Recently, though, right?
Especially recently, but people have discovered dinosaurs in China for more than 100 years as well. Yeah. Let's see, that'd be 90. Yeah, about that time.
Yeah.
But yes, recently especially, China has the pace of discovery there is extraordinary and shows no signs of slowing down. The U.S. is also very high on the list.
Yeah.
Hard to say who's first and who's second.
Yeah. All out west?
Almost all out west.
Because of the ocean that split
it's largely, it's in part a function of that, but it's basically to find the dinosaurs, we got to find the rocks that they're in.
Yeah.
And so the exposure of rocks, of sedimentary rocks that are made from other rocks, like sandstones, mudstones, that kind of stuff, from the age of dinosaurs is greatest out west.
Gotcha.
Here in the east, here in the Pittsburgh area, we have
Come on in.
Our bedrock is way older.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
That looks nice. Thanks.
Awesome. So let's dig into the beef tartare. Let's finish at that point and then dig into beef tartare. So it sounds like dig density could be in the United States or China, but they're such large land masses that
exactly.
they might
It's
not
sort of
be.
hard to know.
But at least in terms of count, they're quite a ways up there.
I would say another country, maybe in terms of density, this would be even higher, is Mongolia. So Mongolia is big, but it's not as big as China or the U.S.
Right.
And they have an extraordinary number of dinosaurs as well. Argentina has a lot. Canada has a lot.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, a few countries in Europe have a lot. Like England has a surprising number of dinosaurs.
Let's dig into this.
I suppose now is the best time to tell you the restaurant we shot at in Pittsburgh is closing. Its name was Legume, and all of the beautiful video we shot is, well, of a place you can only visit in the past. I guess that fits with this episode. Let's talk about this grass-fed beef tartare, though. In the hands of a master chef, raw, chopped beef tartare is delectable. When it's done well, it's a treat. Look at this beauty. With the right blend of sweet shallots, salty capers, herbs, blush onion, and perhaps a dash of hot sauce or some chopped Iberian pepper. Whoa, it's amazing.
This is an interesting conversation piece, but I'll give you the entire egg yolk because
I don't do eggs either. Let's just take it
that's
off.
so funny. So when I was, it's like the one food that everybody likes that I don't like.
Same
is
here.
Eggs. Yeah. So that's really strange and awesome. But when I was, I don't know how it happened.
Yeah.
But like when I was a little tiny kid, like I stopped eating eggs and I've literally never eaten them since. And I feel like it's actually like some kind of like, it's not like I don't like the taste or something.
Yeah.
It's some weird like psychological block I have. And my mom finally revealed to me why she thinks I have this.
Yes.
So, so I was born in the 70s.
Yes.
Around the time that you were, the mid 70s.
Yeah.
And apparently, like, back in the day, breastfeeding wasn't in vogue, and and so everybody was interested in giving their kids food by formula.
Right.
And so apparently I didn't like formula very much as a little tiny baby. And so my mom read someplace that you could take, and I always joke that she read this in Bad Parenting Monthly.
She may have.
And that she read that you could take a hard-boiled egg, mash that up, and put it in milk and give that to your baby to drink. And so apparently I drank this disgusting-sounding slurry for
years?
a couple of months,
Oh,
actually.
a couple of months.
Yeah. And then one day I threw it back in her face and I never drank it again, and I wouldn't eat eggs ever again either. And so like I think I'm like the crocodile part of my brain that was forming when I was like one. Has this aversion to eggs. So yeah. So when
I have to tell you the story now because I try not in these interviews to talk about me at all, but we might keep this just because of how incredible it is. Like my dad, he was laid off the day I was born.
Wow.
So he was a stay-at-home dad
Okay.
for the first couple of years of my life. And once I was eating like solid foods, like fed me eggs every single day.
Okay.
And one time when I was 2 years old, like I had 2.5, I rejected it and never looked back. So yes, like brothers in arms regarding eggs. I just don't
very few of us in the world, I will say. But yeah, those of us that don't like eggs really don't like eggs.
That's unbelievable.
So yeah, it's all yours.
That's really funny. We should nip at the edges maybe.
Yeah. Okay.
And then we'll
Because
avoid.
it does look beautiful.
We'll avoid the rest. Yeah. I don't know.
That's good.
Is it good?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, actually, I have
is
eaten steak tartare in Argentina before.
Really?
It's kind of a thing there. It's a pretty common like appetizer on menus there. I've always liked it. I think it's like a lot of things. It's all about the quality of the, of what's in it, and this is good.
I agree. Yeah, we watched them prepare this today, fresh.
Oh, right.
So yeah. So we started with Fieldwork, which, like I said, I classified that as really the start of paleontology, right? Because you need to find the bones a little bit. But to me, it was really inspiring when we talked briefly about your interest in dinosaurs as a kid.
Yeah.
And because you basically took your childhood dreams and you're like, I'm going to do that and make an impact in that field for the rest of my life. And so tell me like getting started in that, like what really made you gravitate towards that, how you made that a reality, that sort of thing.
Well, I can't remember when I first got interested in dinosaurs, and that's because I was a really little kid, apparently. Right. It's really, to be completely honest, I think some people say this and they're maybe being slightly tongue-in-cheek. I am not being tongue-in-cheek when I say this. I do not remember wanting to be anything else. Except, I will say this. Yeah. I'm a big football fan as well.
Yeah.
My dream actually when I was a little tiny kid was to be the world's first combined NFL running back / paleontologist.
I like that.
Yeah. I used to have these dreams. Like I used to literally dream that I was the running back who never got tackled. Like I just would evade everybody and all these things.
Yeah.
But I mean, as you can see, I grew up to not have the physique required for that, nor the speed or agility. So, but I figured like 1 out of 2 isn't bad. Like 50-50. I got to do one of those things, and I'm really grateful for that. I always loved dinosaurs when I was a kid. I read tons and tons of books about them as a kid. I think the equivalent today would be somebody, an 8-year-old going on their parents' computer and looking at Wikipedia or something like that. Yeah. Which incidentally is shockingly good for dinosaurs.
Good to know.
People that are interested can actually feed their interest for free now. Yeah. As long as they have an internet connection and a computer, which I guess means it's not totally free, but you get the point.
A lot of the world right now.
Exactly. Yeah. I grew up in a little town in upstate New York. To be totally honest, I think being fascinated by dinosaurs was sort of weird to some of the people I grew up with. Thankfully, not weird to everybody.
Sure.
But thankfully, once I got to college, it became cool again, or it became okay to talk about. Yeah. And so a couple of professors at Hobart College. Yeah. I met them beforehand during my college interviews, and they made a really positive impression on me. They gave me the impression that I would be valued there and that they'd be willing to serve as mentors for me. And, and that was absolutely true. So that was a good decision that my family and I made, I guess, for me to go to Hobart. And my first year that I was there, a paleontologist who I'd known who he was since I was about maybe 10 or 11 years old, because he was relatively famous in my field and still is.
What's the name?
His name's Peter Dodson.
Okay.
And so he came to give a lecture at Hobart as part of like a lecture tour that he was doing or whatever. And my professors, to their credit, got me like a one-on-one hour-long sit-down with him as a... Let's see, I would have been, this is 1994, so I would have been 18 years old. I must have made a positive impression on him because he continued to stay in touch with me. He put me in touch with another paleontologist named Craig Dursler, who was doing fieldwork in Wyoming that summer. Craig invited me to come out as a volunteer, and so I did for a couple weeks. Again, I must have done an okay job because I got invited to be Craig's research assistant the next year in 1995 for 6 weeks instead of just 2. Right. So those were my first fieldwork experiences when I was a freshman and sophomore in college. Yeah. And then Peter and I stayed in touch, and when a couple years later, when it came time for me to do an undergrad thesis, Peter very kindly agreed to, co-advise that thesis along with my professors at Hobart, and
that's amazing.
And I ultimately became Peter's grad student beginning in 1997, and that was where. Shortly thereafter, thanks to Peter's support and believing in me and giving me the permissions and funding I needed to do what I needed to do, I ended up in Patagonia in 1998. I ended up in Egypt in 2000, and the rest is sort of history.
The rest we've talked about. That's amazing. Yeah. To me, there was a couple points at which you could have turned, right? You started in childhood, and at some point an adult could have said, you know, why paleontology, and maybe pushed you away.
Yeah.
Or it could have been overly described as nerdy, and you could have been too self-conscious and not wanted to make that a part of your life. But you kind of walked through those gates and arrived at the other side, right?
Yeah, and I will say that yes, plenty of people had told me why paleontology. People don't really tell me that anymore.
Yeah, sure.
Except that they'll say like, "What's the importance of paleontology?" And that's a you know a good question to ask. I think why study paleontology versus like something where you know like engineering or medicine or something like that. And I think those are valid questions.
Yeah.
I basically was too driven, too obsessed, too naive, too devoted to. I mean, you can spin it either way. You can spin it in a negative or a positive. But nothing was going to sway me from being a paleontologist.
Yeah.
You know, if I was going to give it my best, and if I failed, I failed. But I wasn't going to try anything else.
Man, I mean that's a pretty good succinct lesson. Like you had a passion, and you were going to work hard towards that passion. Until there was a breaking point, one or the other, and then you might see it through to another breaking point.
Exactly, yeah. And there's, of course, like any job or any part of life, there are steps forward and steps back.
Yeah.
But I think I guess like I get asked a lot of times, like you know, by you know, young people of various ages, you know, sometimes 5 years old, sometimes 15, sometimes 25, whatever.
Yeah.
You know, how do I do what you do?
Yeah.
And the number one thing for me is I'm pretty smart, but I'm not the smartest person in my field. I'm not the smartest person I know.
Right.
I am the hardest worker I know. You know, or at least one of them.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And so I think that you don't have any control over. I don't have any control over, you know, what I'm born with intellectually.
Right.
But I do have control over how hard I work and how devoted I am.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, people that have achieved success in paleontology and lots of other things, the common denominator is usually work ethic. And so, like for me, you know, of course, innate talent plays a role, but you know, there are plenty of people that are super talented that don't do the work necessary to, you know, to live up to that talent.
Yeah.
And I think you can make up for, you know, you can come a long way with hard work, basically, and
you can make up for gaps in a lot of different areas.
Exactly.
Yeah. It might be your access to information. It might be your access to people and your relationships. It could be intellect, but hard work is that common denominator that can kind of push.
And that's the part that you have a choice over.
Yeah.
You know.
As I mentioned previously, Matt is one of my favorite kind of people. He's kind, he's an adventurer, and he's genuine. In our next episode with Matt, we continue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That's right, more dinosaurs.
That's so funny. I had an aversion to mushrooms for a long time.
Okay. I love mushrooms, actually.
Do
so
you?
We don't have that in common.
Yeah, we don't have that in common. But recently I had a truffle for the first time. It was pretty amazing. I told my brother, maybe I'm a little bougie.
Yeah, you only eat truffles?
I only eat truffles, yeah.
I love that word bougie, by the way. I think that doesn't get used enough.
No. It's very clear what it means.
Oh, yeah, sure, yeah.